right. I won't give you a lot of background. I'll try to give just as much background as you need. This is a survey that had many partners, and we could talk later about the methodological issue of having many partners. These are the main ones. There were 3 principal investigators in a study that was contracted by Okazi and by the Ontario government, MCI, and a very large team of researchers. It's intended to look at the satisfaction with services of fairly recently arrived immigrants, people who've arrived within the last 10 years, with a focus on language training and employment and skills training programs and services. We did an online survey with a great deal of help from probably many people in the room, since we relied upon the agencies themselves to help to get the word out and to give people the link. The result is, of course, that it is not a random sample because we've gone through agencies. And we targeted specifically the GTA, 15 census metropolitan areas and 5 smaller communities. It was conducted in 12 languages, and there was a qualitative aspect in that we did follow-up focus groups with service providers who helped to give us a sense of what's going on with the data, and specific groups, immigrants with disabilities, Francophone immigrants, LGBTQ immigrants, and I missed one when I wrote this up. We also did a follow-up with precarious workers. So the survey has many limitations. It varies by community, and that's mainly because our first point of entry to contacting people was the agencies and their ability to pass on the survey to people varied. There is an age bias in that older people do not use computers at the same rate as younger people, so we had a little bit of difficulty there. And we did do some follow-up in specific communities to try to generate a more representative sample in those communities where we were having the most difficulty getting responses. And also, we had aimed to get a higher percentage of non-users, and that proved to be quite difficult. Although there were a group of people who did not complete the survey, and we believe that probably the majority of those who quit the survey before they qualified to be included in the data were in fact non-users, but of course they didn't tell us much. Just in terms of today's objectives, which are not to talk about service satisfaction, although I will tell you that the largest overall finding was that people were very satisfied with the services that they are receiving. There's a list of the objectives that we were asked to speak about today where possible, and this just gives you the sense that we can say the most about users versus non-users and smaller versus larger centers, something about civic engagements and belonging, although the question that we had that's most helpful there was about social inclusion, a little bit about use of the internet, and rather little about economic trajectories. We have quite a lot of data, but not analytical questions, and we have no information about desire for pre-arrival information. Over half of our respondents arrived in 2008 to 10. There's also a sample bias there in that the language training programs were especially helpful, partly because people who were in classes undertook the survey, and so we have an overrepresentation there. 85% non-white, as you'd expect, 158 countries. Largest group is South Asian, although in general, although the largest by country of origin is Chinese. And there is an underrepresentation of people from the Philippines. And I don't know why, but I'll just mention that. This is just briefly a breakdown of the respondents by country The first five are the five with the largest number of respondents, and the last two are regions where the countries have been grouped together. And some clear patterns, which are obvious. Probably most people in the room know them, so I won't focus too long on this. Refugees from Colombia, family class from Sri Lanka, independent class from China, India, and Pakistan. The language most frequently spoken is pretty straightforward, but again, not representative, which is partly an indication of the very recency of the arrivals, and partly the fact that we had a lot of people who were taking language courses at the time. And education by country of birth, again, this is probably fairly expected. High school or lower shows up very strongly in the Sri Lankan group, postgraduate degrees in the India and Pakistan group, and the rest more evenly distributed. So that's just to give you a brief picture of who the respondents were. We have a lot of questions about their status and their satisfaction. I'll just focus on about 3 or 4 slides that give you an indication. The unemployment rate, as you might expect, is very high, over 29%. Full-time employed is the second, almost 23%, and the income level is very low. This is personal. We also have household, but I only put personal up. That's just a demographic profile of the users. If we look at those who did not use the services, which was 17%, we've been trying to get higher. Just a quick picture of who they are. Refugees and international students had lower usage rates, more males than females. And we tried to get at why people were not using the services. About a third of them said that they had no need of services, and another third reported that they did not know about the services. And of course, that third is the third that we would be most concerned about. And we do have a breakdown of where those people are by community. But again, we have to look at questions of sample. When we look at the challenges, finding employment, as you might expect, is by far the biggest issue, followed by language, followed by social isolation, housing, and then it goes down there significantly. But finding employment, of course, is double the next challenge, which is language skills. The answers varied fairly significantly according to the size of the city or town. And we have a tremendous amount of data. I know some of the LIPs have already accessed the data for their local area, but I'll just give you a sense of the kind of things that we found. Difficulty of finding work. The smaller the town, the easier it is apparently to find work. Although we think that the reason for the ease of finding work in small towns is that a lot of people have already got work lined up before they go to the small towns. And that certainly would make sense. And the difference between the GTA and large CMAs is not very significant, nor is it for the small and medium-sized CMAs. But it certainly does raise some questions in terms of the need for services, given that people who are employed and who haven't found difficulty getting work express a lower need for services. And we know from yesterday that the services available in the smaller towns are not always as great as they are in the GTA and the larger CMAs. Now, that's not to suggest that we don't have the need for services in the smaller towns, but it certainly does suggest that there are differential needs in terms of what people are looking for in these different places. The other thing we found, which is also an economic indicator, and in general, those in the smaller places appear to be doing better economically, but I say that with a great deal of hesitation. However, one of the areas that we asked quite a lot of questions about was, how do people get to services? Is distance a factor? We have measures of how far people live from the services and how they get there and how long it takes them to get there. And distance is definitely a factor at every geography. However, those who had the least difficulty getting to services were those in the smaller places, because the level of car ownership is so high in those areas. And obviously larger CMAs in the GTA, as you would expect, have a much higher rate of public transportation usage, and the GTA appears to have the highest proportion of people who are walking to services. So there's a great deal of work left to be done in answering questions about how important is the location of the service. This just gives you a taste of some of the findings. We also asked a number of questions about social isolation, and this is just an overall graph. We have a lot finer detail. More females than males feel socially isolated. We think that that has something to do with workforce participation, of course, and also language. This is probably something that is well known, but we can probe further into the data to find out how isolation is cross-tabulated with a number of other things. We were a little bit surprised, however, to find that older women show the least feeling of social isolation. And I don't know whether that's a sample issue, because there were relatively few of them, or if there are some other things going on there. And in terms of social isolation, this is my last slide, we looked at the different social groups. Not unexpectedly, Francophones, immigrants with disabilities, LGBTQ respondents, and precarious workers, who I forgot to write down, feel more socially isolated. All of them have lower use of services, and all of them have a lower level of satisfaction with services. Francophones are the least satisfied with the services. The needs are greatest within the first 5 years, no surprise there. Older respondents feel less isolation and more satisfaction. They also rely more on family members for help, and I don't know if that is alone the explanation for that factor, or if their expectations are lower than the expectations of those who are entering the labor force and need language skills and housing, etc. And the final point, not surprising at all, younger respondents have a higher rate of internet usage and are more comfortable in English, and also experience less social isolation. So that's a very quick overview of the results. If anyone wants to ask me questions about more detail, I'd be happy to do that.